Um, so over the last few weeks, we've been discussing how burnout changes things, like, thinking, emotions, sleep, that kind of thing. And today we're going to look at something that we generally don't connect back to our brain, and that's the consequences of burnout for relationships. We typically don't think of relationships as a brain based thing, but people will say things like, I feel distant from people, or I don't have the patience for people, or I just want people to leave me alone. And we tend to kind of set that outside of ourselves. And we tend to think about it as a communication skill issue or something very external. And what we're trying to get at with this series, and the reason we kind of step these out over a number of weeks, is we want to change the narrative about how we think about burnout, thinking about it more as the way in which your physiology receives information. So when we begin to look at it through that lens, and we look at it through the way in which your brain is operating, what it does then is it opens up to us opportunities for management. Because if we consider it as external to ourselves, or we consider it as other people's issues, or we consider it as just the way things are, and of course, all of these things relate to burnout. But when we can see that a central theme is my physiology, the way my brain is doing things, the way my brain is seeing things, and as the world appears different, we can begin to understand that actually maybe things aren't that different, but maybe the system that's receiving information from the world is changing. So again, we're going to start off with the same strategy, thinking about these things and thinking, does anything in here feel familiar? Changes. We're looking at the way things are changing through life. So some of us are just irritable, but sometimes it can just be that you're getting more irritable than normal. You're feeling less patient with people you care about, and this again is one of those things that has come up over and over again. It's in relation to people you care about, which often leads to shame and guilt afterwards. Avoiding conversations, taking comments more personally, stuff that wouldn't have bothered you in the past, or feeling emotionally distant from people, or getting cynical with people when they express emotions. Again, in a way that maybe you might describe as not being yourself. Now, the World Health Organization defines burnout as an occupational phenomenon, but what we want to get across here very clearly is that whilst it might be an occupational phenomenon, the effects follow us around. They're not neatly contained inside of work. So your same brain that's dealing with pressure and deadlines and emails and all that and whatnot, it's the same brain that's following you home and generating your relationships and looking after your children. So burnout is, whilst it's an occupational phenomenon, affects the organ, of course, that you carry around with you all the time. So again, we are pitting two different versions of yourself against each other as a kind of a mental experiment. And imagine the two different versions of yourself. And again, we have all experienced this. And again, it won't be anything massively new, but it's worth focusing back on the idea that it's different versions of your physiology, different versions of your brain, different versions of how you are create, as it were, a different reality. So you know that, imagine version A, you're calm and you're relaxed and you're rested and everything's kind of kosher. And somebody says to you, oh, well, did you remember to get milk? Did you remember to pick up that thing I told you? You remember I told you I had ordered a thing in the shop. Did you grab that? And you think, oh shoot, Jesus, I actually didn't do it. But no, sorry, I can pop in now. Now I know I can figure it out. I can ring my mate. I can call the shop. I can figure it out. It's grand. And then it's a non-issue. But you can imagine the other version of yourself that we all have experienced, where you're hassled and you're wrecked and you're completely frazzled and you're overloaded and you're exhausted. When you get the same question, did you grab milk on the way home? Like I texted you about it, and you have this very different response. It's the response of the overloaded brain, and we'll come to this in a second. But it's because this nice response versus a much more basic reaction requires energy. and resources. Same conversation, different brain state. So we want to keep that as the core theme. So what it does for us, and the reason I nearly want people after these 20-minute sessions to leave thinking, if he says that thing one more time, what I really want to get across is we have to think about this as my brain state. So what is my brain state now, and how is that affecting what's happening? Very simple. How is my brain doing right now? Because that's going to affect the way I see the world, the way I interpret. Same conversation, different brain state. So your brain becomes more defensive. So we go back to our fight or flight, our idea of the balance of nice, relaxed prefrontal executive control, which gives us nuance and patience and consideration and planning and thinking through consequences, versus fight or flight based, reactive, non-nuanced, black and white reactivity. So when we get this prolonged stress that we get with burnout, we tend to have more of the fight or flight type responses. Your threat systems actually become more attuned, they become more active. And with that, then come faster, quicker, stronger, emotion based responses, because your brain is thinking, okay, I'm under pressure. I need help. I need to respond to this thing very, very quickly. I need to protect myself. And with that, then the prefrontal cortex goes offline and you lose this reflective thinking capacity. So, this is why we want simple, easy rules to think about. When we are in that state of being flustered or angry or upset or lonely or whatever it might be, what's a simple rule? What's my brain doing? What state am I in? Never mind them. What state am I in? It's a good, simple question to ask yourself. Your brain becomes slower at reflecting, faster at reacting. So this is what we want to do. We want to give it a simple question. What state is my brain in? When we lose our prefrontal cortex influence, then we get into this thing, we call it the interpretation trap. And the interpretation trap is, it just changes the meaning that your brain extracts from information. Sorry, I'm just distracted letting people in. Please excuse me, looking at the other screen here. The interpretation trap changes the way that you view information. The information is not changing, but again, the brain state that is receiving that information is changing. So the classic is the two blue ticks on WhatsApp. You send a WhatsApp and you don't get a reply, but you see that a person has seen it. No response. Think of the two brain states, the calm, rested, reflective brain versus the overloaded, hassled brain. And we get very different interpretations of the same event. That is, they've probably seen it, they're probably super busy, or they'll reply later, or a million different things in which everything is fine, versus your brain saying, they're ignoring me. I must have done something wrong. I should follow up quickly with a text message. I need to clarify this. We've all experienced that. And we know actually when we're experiencing that tomorrow we'll probably feel different. But right now it's so irresistible when your brain is overloaded and completely and utterly stressed. It's very easy to fall into that interpretation trap of the negativity bias. Or a short message, yeah, give me, I'll be home at 5 or whatever it might be. The interpretation changes. I know they're busy and everything will be fine versus they must be really annoyed at me. Or when there's an inevitable disagreement in the world, be that queuing up in Tesco or buying a pair of shoes or at the garage or when you come home from work or whatever, disagreements are inevitable, but it's how we interpret things. People don't understand me. They're not really listening to me. And our brain is a prediction mechanism. It's a prediction engine. It likes to predict things. It likes to close loops. This is why a non-response from a text message feels so difficult to manage, because your brain wants to finish the loop. It wants to get a response and close it up. And if it doesn't get the response, it will close the loop anyway with whatever feels best at that time. And your brain will be happier to close that loop with an error rather than wait and leave it open. This is really interesting. Watch, you can do this today, you can do this tomorrow. Watch your brain closing loops all the time. It's always trying to figure out, okay, how is this resolution going to come about? And as I say, it would much rather be wrong than to leave to leave the loop open. How does this then filter into relationships? Well, in this brain state, hassled, overloaded, etc., your capacity to generate empathy is deprived of you because you are deprived of energy. You are low resource, in a low resource state. Fight or flight, limbic system activation is high, prefrontal cortex activation is low. To get empathetic, one of the things we need to do is we need to stop, actually, and just listen. We don't even need to go all the way to considering somebody else's perspective. We need to just say, right, stop, and don't say the first thing that comes into your mouth, into your head. And that requires prefrontal cortex activation. That requires energy, not saying the blatantly obvious thing. So this prefrontal cortex, which gives us the capacity for the consideration of perspective, the slow reflective capacity, because that's offline, in burnout, we tend to get more of the reactivity. And the short circuit for that, or the way to try and balance that out, is to, in some way, shape, or form, however we can manage it, try to get our prefrontal cortex online. But what I want to get across to you is that is a perfectly natural, normal way to be when you're burnt out, is to lack empathy, is to lack the capacity for reflection, because they are skills that demand a lot of energy. And we simply don't have that, and we get into fight or flight very readily. So what happens then is this then fundamentally changes the mechanisms by which relationships work. Distances begin to appear. And when we find ourselves being distant from people, it again creates one of these vicious cycles, because then we begin to think, Jesus, there must be something wrong. There must be something wrong with me. I must be a bad person. I must be a terrible partner. I must be whatever. Your brain is closing a loop. And often the reality is actually quite simple, which is your brain just says, right, I just need a break. I can't handle this constant pressure to constantly try and build up enough energy to get to empathy, to get to understanding, to get to pausing my reactions, to get to managing what seems to be this almost unmanageable amount of demands that are placed on me. And withdrawal, I think about this as a sign of depletion rather than rejection. And then it becomes a cycle. So I've talked about this cycle before. And that is the idea that, with pressure comes reduced patience or lower resources. So you kind of get snappy, or you get more conflict, or there's a greater impatience for other people that affects other people. You get conflict, you get arguments and whatnot. And then, of course, people pull away, or people feel like they want to support you less. So you create distance between you and other people. And what that does then is becomes a threat to your brain, because, again, social rejection is a huge source of threat based on our evolution. And you get more threat, more stress. What does it do? It takes your prefrontal cortex offline, so it fires up the fight or flight even more. So we go back up to the top of the loop, and that increases pressure. What does that do? Creates more conflict, less patience, all that kind of thing. So we end up very quickly then getting into a burnout cycle. So I've written a list of things here about what helps. But the two things I'm going to say are really, really important, that are kind of sort of basic rules, is number one, ask yourself the question, what state really is my brain in? Just a quick pause. And it can be just as simple, I'm absolutely raging, or I'm so lonely, or I'm really depressed, or I'm really angry, or I'm absolutely disgusted. If you just get there and you can name it, say, all right, okay, you don't have to act on anything, just naming the thing. Say, right, reflect on the state of your brain. And the second thing is there any way I can get my prefrontal cortex back on? Is there any way I can soothe my physiology? What can I do to calm this brain that's firing? So the things that, I mean, these are, as Sister Stan said about mindfulness, is kind of simple but not easy. These are some of the things that emerge from the literature, is in terms of trying to break this cycle. But they're all fundamentally based on the premise that you recognize at some level the brain state that you're in and trying to get the prefrontal cortex back on, trying to get some way to rest and recover, which is not 4 hours on Instagram. Reducing chronic overload. I know that that's easy to say when we've got children and we've got financial demands and relationship demands and work demands and whatever. Something you can actually do, and you can do this evening, is just say, I'm going to slow a conversation down. That takes a bit of prefrontal cortex activity, but not a lot. You say, I'm actually going to wait 3 seconds before a reply. You'd be absolutely astounded at how that gets, just allows, because our brain is so exquisitely quick. If you say, I'm going to wait 3 seconds before a reply to that, and just keep doing that, it can really, really help. Sometimes it gets annoying for people, but you know what? If you're giving yourself a little bit of extra time, it can really help to change the shape of a simple conversation. Recognize the brain state before reacting. I've mentioned that. And assuming less and asking more. And it's a really interesting one. But that we'll come to that later on. We'll talk a little bit about communication. But the goal here is not to have what I call here at home a home and away type conversation, where everything is, do you want to talk about it and here are my feelings and everything. We want to get a bit even just more simple than that. Not perfect communication, just some capacity in a relationship for some connection. And that might even be when you're having that pause, rather than going back with blaming or whatever it might be, to verbalize or articulate the state in which you find yourself. I'm absolutely so angry. I'm really, really disgusted. Because that can open up. It can begin this process of just some type of communication, some type of connection, where in this white heat of an argument, let's say in the context of a relationship, there's a lot of assuming that the other person knows how you feel, and assuming that if they don't know how you feel, there's something wrong with them, or it's some sort of a failure on their part, and assuming that they know how you feel, why you feel that way, and that they should already be solving that problem. So even sometimes just saying something simple, take a couple of seconds, saying, I feel really angry, might just open the capacity for a little connection where the other person might say, oh, I didn't realize that, or whatever it might be. I know that sounds simple, but in an emergency, we need sort of fairly simple, clean narratives. What are our key takeaways? And I always want people to try and come away with something fairly simple. Recognizing your brain state and getting your prefrontal cortex online. And that actually requires a little bit of personal responsibility, which sometimes we are all guilty of maybe sidelining a little bit. So the key takeaways from burnout: changes the way your brain attends to things. It changes the size and character of emotions. It changes interpretation of the same events over and over again. And obviously then it changes our overt behavior. And then relationships suffer on that basis, not because other people don't care, other people are changing, but it's because our brain is carrying too much stuff. It's under too much pressure. Our brain state is changing the interaction. So our two key messages, at the risk of somebody giving out to me for repeating the same thing over and over again: recognize what brain state you're in and try in some way, shape, or form to get your prefrontal cortex back online. So with exactly 1 minute to spare, it's going to point you towards next week. Next week, we're going to look at decision making. This is going to be coming near the end of the Burnout series. Why we make poor decisions in burnout, and you know exactly what's coming. It's going to be the same themes over and over again: risk taking and shortcuts, and the difficulty of staying off your phone, or the difficulty of logging out or logging off, or whatever it might be. Why do we do that? Because again, my fundamental belief as a neuroscientist is, if we understand the mechanisms by which these things happen, we can then go about understanding how interventions can work. This will be what is it next week? Is it week number? Let me check. Yes, it's week 6 of 9 next week. So we'll be closing it in over July. And I've received a few really interesting suggestions by email. So if you have more suggestions, I'm very, very happy to hear them. One that seems to be coming to the top is what is AI doing to our brains? And what does my brain look like when it's constantly sitting on ChatGPT? So that's get rising to the top. So we'll consider that. In any event, again, a massive thank you to everybody for coming along. I really appreciate your company on over lunchtime. I hope you have gotten something from it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out by email. Otherwise, I'll see you all again next Thursday. Bye. Have a nice afternoon. Bye bye.